Welcome to the Dr. John Andrew Morrow Polymath Podcast. Today we're going native. We will be exploring Louis Riel and Métis identity. If you enjoy our content, by all means click subscribe. Louis Riel is a towering figure among the Métis of Canada and the United States. While he was not the first Métis, as there were Métis communities in Canada since at least the 17th century, and possibly as early as the 16th century, he was one of the first to speak of the Métis as a nation, as opposed to a race, a people, an ethnic group, a tribe, or a band. And while he does not have the final say when it comes to defining Métis identity, as identity is fluid and evolving, and the living should have as much a voice as the dead, Louis Riel holds an enormous amount of sway in matters of self-identification. How then did Louis Riel define himself? What were in his mind the markers of Métis identity? And how are they relevant in the early 21st century when Métis identity has become so contentious? A comprehensive study of the collected writings of Louis Riel can shed light on this controversial and divisive subject. As shocking as it may seem to some, and as offensive as it may be to their sensibilities, Louis Riel referred to the indigenous inhabitants of the Americas as sauvages when writing and speaking in French. At the time, sauvage was the antonym of civilized. Savages were wild people, nomadic or semi-nomadic, who were not fully sedentary or civilized according to the standards of the Old World. In his Revelations about Beauport, written in 1876, Louis Riel described himself in the following terms. Know me. Most of my blood comes from France. I have some from Ireland. And I also have Indian blood. In the French it says du sang sauvage. He had no qualms with claiming to have Indian ancestry. In fact, he took great pride in the matter. As he wrote in a poem written in French between 1874 and 1878, Indian blood shines in me, and I praise my ancestors. Louis Riel referred to himself as a native on one occasion, namely in his petition to Grover Cleveland, the President of the United States, which was written in 1885 while he was in Saskatchewan. Speaking of himself, he wrote that he is a native of the Northwest Territory and connected by his origin with the Indian race. In his Political Fragments, authored in 1885, Louis Riel spoke as an Aboriginal, as an American, as anyone would, but principally as prophet of the New World, a term he would repeat again in the same segment. He was not merely a Métis, he was an Aboriginal. He was an American, and yes, he was also a Canadian. One thing did not exclude the other. He represented a spectrum. In his letter to the English half-breeds of Red Deer, St. Catherine, and St. Paul, written in 1886, Louis Riel described his people as the original half-breeds. He asserted that the Aboriginal half-breeds are determined to save their rights or to perish at once. Although he was phenotypically white or European, according to stereotypical standards, as are many Métis Indians, Louis Riel never identified as such while in Canada. As he expressed in his address to the jury, delivered in 1885, I remembered that half-breed meant white and Indian. And while I paid attention to the suffering Indians and the half-breeds, I remembered that the greatest part of my heart and blood was white, and I have directed my attention to the whites to the best of my ability. While in the United States, however, Louis Riel identified as a white man. Although some would condemn him for doing so, his options were limited to those available. In 1860, 1870, and 1880, the racial categories used by the American government included Indian, Chinese, black, mulatto, or white. Identifying as Indian would have made citizenship impossible. He would have had no right to vote. He could have been forcibly placed in an Indian reserve. Refusing to tie his own noose and cast himself into destruction, Riel noted that he was white, which, as a Métis, he most certainly was, at least in part. Even in the 21st century, Métis people in the United States face a predicament, as racial categories include Native and white, but not Métis. Some select Native, some choose white, while others check both boxes. Whichever ones they select, they are not lying. They are indeed part Native, and they are indeed part white. They are not race-shifting, they are biracial. When racial constructs are imposed by governments, people are compelled to adopt them despite their aversion. In his public notice to the inhabitants of Rupertsland, issued in 1869, Louis Riel stated that he represented the interests of the French-speaking population and described the English-speaking population as invaders. In fact, in the French-Canadian Métis People, written in 1883, Riel described French as the language of our dear ancestors. In fact, in one poem he boasts, "My mother belongs to a warrior race. She is pure French of blood. Her name is Lagimodière," and claims that she descends from Louis XI. While Louis Riel commonly described himself as a French-Canadian Métis, or Métis Canadien-Français, he was not in the habit of identifying exclusively as French-Canadian. In his speech on the occasion of the Festival of St. John the Baptist, delivered in 1873, Riel recognized the existence of both a French-Canadian community and a Métis community that were interconnected. He spoke of your children meeting under the flag of St. John the Baptist, which we adopt as our national holiday, come to greet you. It must be a great pleasure to see the founding of a new people celebrating their nationality here. The French-Canadian Métis, extending their hand to their brothers the French-Canadians, want to continue here the beautiful work which has long been pursued by the generous and noble province of Quebec. In his poem The Early Days, written in 1870 while he was in the Red River in Manitoba, Louis Riel invoked the Métis Nation and the burnt wood of the North, les Bois-Brûlés du Nord. In another poem, while the Métis planted, composed in 1877, Louis Riel invoked the zealous chiefs of all the burnt wood, les chefs zélés de tous les bois brûlés. In a letter to the editor published in 1869, Louis Riel and company spoke on behalf of the Métis Canadian population of the Red River, and they signed the letter to the editor as two Métis Canadian residents of the Red River. By Canadian, they meant French-Canadian. In letter after letter, in speech after speech, Louis Riel referred to his people as half-breeds. In several letters, Louis Riel referred to the English half-breeds. Louis Riel wrote a letter to our brothers, the English and French Métis, from Lac Capelle and surrounding areas in 1885, addressing them as dear relatives and friends. Whether they were settled Métis, the free Métis of the plains, or semi-nomadic hunters, traders, and voyageurs, they belong to the same people. In his essay, Dealing with the Problems of the Red River, from 1872, Louis Riel described his immediate people as the French Métis. In his national program of the French-Canadian Métis, produced in 1873, Louis Riel spoke of "we French Métis" and our Indian rights to the lands of the country. Speaking of his blood, Louis Riel claimed that "I have some from Ireland," in his Revelations about Beauport, written in 1876. In his Ode to My Sister, written in 1879, he wrote, "I love that Métis Celtic spirit." Celtic Métis, Métis Celtic. The term Métis appears in French colonial records to describe people of mixed French and First Nations origin. Although Louis Riel tended to qualify the term Métis, distinguishing between the French Métis and the English Métis, he was also in the habit of using the term Métis without qualifiers. In his letter to William Dease, written in 1870, Riel asserted, "I ask nothing in reward, nothing but the support of all the Métis." He insisted that the Métis are but one: English Métis, French Métis, Celtic Métis, Métis. Louis Riel overwhelmingly referred to himself as a French-Canadian Métis. Overwhelmingly, Métis Canadien Français. That's how he identified. He developed a national program of the French-Canadian Métis in 1873. In his letter to C.J. Courcelle, penned in 1874, Louis Riel insisted that the Métis were French Canadians. In his words, the French-Canadian Métis of the North are a branch of the French-Canadian tree. They want to grow like that tree and with that tree. They do not want to detach themselves from it. They want to suffer and rejoice with it. I would like, with the help of God, to work to make the French-Canadian Métis people great enough to be the heirs of Lower Canada. That's Quebec. In the same way that a good son receives and benefits from the goods that are bequeathed to him by his parents. And if you ask me why I do not want our people to be called French Canadians, quite simply, I will answer you that this name being already his family name, it is advisable to give him another one, which designates him particularly, and which is in a way a baptismal name as a people. And I want that distinctive name to be Métis, the Métis name that we have always carried. I believe that the name Métis is likely to favor the founding of a powerful nationality in Manitoba and the Northwest. It's a name that means mixture. Until now, it has been used to designate the race produced by the mixture of European and Indian blood. However, it is also suitable to name a race of human beings created by the mixture between all bloods, but which, while passing through the French-Canadian mold, would retain the memory of its origin by calling itself Métis. The name Métis would be agreeable to everyone because it is not exclusive and has the advantage of properly referring to the contingent from which each nation would help found the new people. And from that point of view, I think it would be difficult to base our nationality in Manitoba and the Northwest as a broader and stronger idea than the Métis idea. To better complete the exposition of my thought, I will compare the founding of the French-Canadian Métis people to a piece of material that we would have to make. And when the material is finished, it will be French material, because the workers of the beautiful profession of France will have worked there. It will be a truly Canadian fabric, because our weavers were true Canadians at heart. It will be a French-Canadian Métis fabric. So let's have no worries. French, Canadians, and Métis, let us work together, not only without suspicion, but also with a lot of friendship, as God wants to use us all to found the Métis French-Canadian people. In his notes on the intermarriage of people written in Montana between 1881 and 1884, Louis Riel predicted that all the Indian race of North America will give way to a new race, the Métis race, which will vary by country of origin. In Manitoba, it will be French-Canadian Métis. The most extraordinary poetic exposition of Métis identity composed by Riel consists of the French-Canadian Métis. Written in 1883, it reads, "I love beyond measure, and I admire the French-Canadian Métis, this new people that has already made great accomplishments." The mixed origins in the Métis and the hyphenation of Métis and French-Canadian are not negatives in the eyes of Riel, they are a positive. If a hyphen is placed between Métis and French-Canadian, both races assure that it will be for the better. Métis, our varying degree of Indian blood, which can reach extremes, is French-Canadian, all the same. In his letter to J.V. Grandin, written in 1884, Louis Riel asked the Monseigneur to bless his people, bless us, especially the French-Canadian Métis, bless us along with the Métis of all other origins. In 1885, while in Saint-Laurent, Louis Riel consecrated the Métis to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, praying, "Choose us, all the French-Canadian Métis in a special way and make us your chosen people. As Louis Riel expressed in his letter to Valentin Végreville, written in 1885, Végreville, he was committed to defending the interest of the French-Canadian Métis. In fact, the version number 1, Oath for the Guards, produced in Batoche between March and April of 1885, proclaims, "Swear before God that you will be faithful to the French-Canadian Métis movements and their provincial government." This is a veritable pledge of allegiance to the French-Canadian Métis Nation. In his journal, written in Batoche in 1885, Louis Riel spoke of our French-Canadian Métis hearts. And when signing political statements, declarations of war and independence, Louis Riel did so on behalf of, and I quote, "the members of the French-Canadian Métis Exovidat of Saskatchewan." In his letter to A.A. Taché from 1885, Riel wrote, "You, the Métis, especially all the French-Canadian Métis." In fact, he repeatedly wrote about the French-Canadian Métis. Although Louis Riel described indigenous people as sauvages, or Indians, and was proud of having some sang sauvage, or Indian blood, he never described himself or his people, the Métis, as sauvages, or First Nations. What is more, Louis Riel never described himself as an Indian or an indigenous person. The closest he came to assert such a thing was affirming that he was a native of the Northwest who had Indian ancestry. Louis Riel only described himself as an Aboriginal on one occasion that we know of. Likewise, he only once referred to his people as original half-breeds, or Aboriginal half-breeds in his writings. Original half-breeds. I like that. Although others perceived him as a savage half-breed, a French-Canadian, or a white man, Louis Riel never identified as white while in Canada. He did, however, do so while seeking citizenship in the United States, as was the case with the other Métis of Montana and many other states. If the Métis wanted to be homesteaders, they identified as white. When the Métis wanted to settle on reservations, they identified as Indians. While indigenous by identity, Riel recognized that most of his blood was white, and that he was concerned about helping whites as well as Indians and half-breeds. Consequently, one cannot condemn Métis people for identifying as white, French, or Indian without condemning Louis Riel himself. It's exactly what he did. This is part and parcel of the complexity of the Métis condition. Of all the ethnonyms he employed, Riel overwhelmingly preferred to identify as French-Canadian Métis, Métis Canadien Français. While he described his people as half-breeds, he did not use the term to describe himself. He also distinguished between the French-speaking Catholic Métis and the English-speaking Protestant Métis, although both of these communities would eventually merge together, with most of the former being assimilated into the latter, thereby losing an essential conductor of culture, language. Le français, c'est bien important. While he used numerous ethnonyms to describe himself and his people, including the terms French, Métis Canadian, Celtic Métis, Bois-Brûlés, and half-breed, there's no evidence that he used terms such as Métis, Michif, Chico, Créole, Jean Libre, Homme Libre, Freeman, Country-born, mixed blood, or Ottipé Misiwak. Louis Riel recognized that there were Métis of many other origins, and that they were found throughout the continent of North America. Riel viewed the Métis as a multiracial race, a people, a flock, a tribe, a country, and a nation. He recognized that the Métis of the Red River and the Northwest had a particular history. However, this history did not deny other Métis histories. When it came to the Métis, Louis Riel was a proponent of diversity, plurality, tolerance, inclusivity, fraternity, and sorority. He opposed imperial efforts to divide his people and nation in the same way that he was against internal division. Would you like to learn some more? Read The legacy of Louis Riel.